Survival is our most basic instinct. When the body needs fuel, the mind screams for it. We will eat bark, leather, even dirt to stay alive. It is a biological imperative written into our DNA. But in the winter of 1978, 5 men defied this rule. They were found in a trailer in the high Sierra Mountains, surrounded by safety. They had matches they never struck. They had heavy clothing that they never wore. And most haunting of all, they had enough food to last a year. But they didn't open the cans. They sat in the dark, surrounded by Starvation, and chose to starve. You are watching The Oracle Investigates. Tonight, we look into the minds of the Yuba County Five and ask why they let the darkness win. To understand the horror of the end, we must understand the innocence of the beginning. They were known simply as the Boys. There was Bill Sterling, Jack Huett, Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. Ranging in age from 24 to 32, they were men with the hearts of children. All of them lived with their parents or had intellectual disabilities that bound them together in a tight, protective circle. They were not hikers. They were not survivalists. They were gentle souls who thrived on routine. Bill Sterling was a man who loved Jesus and hated conflict. Ted Weiher was a friendly giant who would wave at strangers until they waved back. They existed in a world of safety, structure, and basketball. The date was February 24th. The Gators, their basketball team, had a big game the next day. The prize was a week in Los Angeles. For the boys, this was everything. They laid out their uniforms. They packed their bags. They were ready. Nothing about their behavior suggested they were planning to disappear. That evening, they piled into Jack Madruga's prized possession, a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. Madruga loved this car. He wouldn't let anyone else drive it. He wouldn't even let a candy wrapper stay on the floorboard. They drove to Chico, California to watch a college basketball game. They cheered. They laughed. They won their bets. After the game, they did what they always did. They stopped at Behr's Market. They bought Hostess fruit pies and a quart of milk. It was a mundane, beautiful Friday night. They got back into the Montego. They were 50 miles from home. The road was straight, flat, and familiar. All they had to do was drive south. 45 minutes to warm beds, 45 minutes to the game of their lives. But they didn't go south. This is the moment where logic abandons the story. At an intersection just outside of Chico, Jack Madruga turned the wheel. Instead of heading home to the safety of the valley, he drove the pristine Mercury Montego east, straight toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. Why? The boys were afraid of the dark. They were not dressed for winter, wearing only light jackets and loafers. And yet, they drove past the pavement onto a gravel logging road, climbing higher and higher into the snow line. No tracks were forcing them up there, no other cars. Just a decision, made in silence, to drive away from the world they knew and into the void. They were not alone on the mountain. Joseph Shawns was a man having the worst night of his life. His car had gotten stuck in a snowdrift hours earlier. While trying to push it out, he suffered a mild heart attack. He sat in his freezing vehicle, pain radiating through his chest, praying for help. Then he saw lights. He saw the turquoise Mercury Montego pull up behind him. He saw headlights cut through the blizzard. Shawns called out for help. He screamed into the wind, but help didn't come. Shawns reported seeing the lights turn off. He sat in the dark, watching silhouettes move outside. He later told police he heard whistling. He claimed he saw a woman holding a baby in the shadows. Was it a hallucination brought on by pain? Or did he see the boys, standing in the snow, looking back at him? When Shawns called for help again, the silhouette stopped moving. The headlights stayed off. Whoever was in that car didn't want to be found. They were hiding, and the snow kept falling. 3 days later, the mountain began to give up its first clues. On a remote logging road, thousands of feet above the valley floor, a forest ranger spotted a splash of turquoise against the white. It was Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. Investigators expected to find the car stuck, its wheels buried in the mud, or its tank empty. But when they turned the key, the engine roared to life. It had a quarter tank of gas. The tires hadn't even lost traction. But there was something wrong. Something that defied everything the families knew about Jack Madruga. The driver's side window was rolled down. In the middle of a winter storm, Jack, the man who obsessed over the cleanliness of this car, had left it open to the elements. The boys were gone. It wasn't a wreck. It was a pristine tomb. The families didn't wait for the police. They knew their sons. They knew that if the boys were out there, they were terrified. But the mountain had other plans. The day after the car was found, a massive blizzard, the kind that erases landmarks and kills the unwary, slammed into the Sierras. Search parties were turned back by 5-foot drifts. Helicopters were grounded. For days, then weeks, the silence was absolute. The police were baffled. Why would 5 men, none of whom were outdoorsmen, walk away from a working car with a heater into a lethal frost? It was as if the mountain had simply opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. Winter eventually retreated, but it didn't leave quietly. In June 1978, a group of motorcyclists riding near a Forest Service trailer, 70 miles from Chico, caught a scent on the breeze. A scent that didn't belong in the fresh mountain air. They found Madruga and Sterling first. Their remains were scattered along the road leading to the trailer. They hadn't made it. They had succumbed to the elements, their bodies eventually found by the very animals they had spent their lives being afraid of. But the real mystery wasn't on the road. It was inside the trailer. When searchers broke the lock on the trailer door, the air inside was still at a freezing temperature. And there, lying on a bunk, was Ted Weiher. Ted was 5'11" and 200 pounds when he left home. When they found him, he weighed barely 100 pounds. He was wrapped in 8 heavy sheets, tucked in so tightly it was as if someone had performed a ritual. He had lived for weeks, perhaps months, in that bed. His feet were black with frostbite. He had watched the sun rise and set through those windows, waiting. But for what? Or for whom? Here is where the Oracle Investigates must ask the question that keeps investigators awake at night. Inside that trailer, there was a propane tank outside, full. It would have provided heat for months. It was never turned on. There were lockers filled with sea rations, military meals designed to keep men alive in the worst conditions. Only a dozen had been opened. Ted Weiher starved to death in a room full of food. He froze to death next to a heater he never touched. Was he too weak to move? Or was his mind so shattered by the deviation that he no longer understood how to save himself? Some suggest he was waiting for permission. Others believe he wasn't alone in that room. That someone else was there, watching him fade and doing nothing. Every mystery has a ghost. For the Yuba County Five, that ghost is Gary Mathias. When the trailer was processed, investigators found Gary's white tennis shoes, but Gary himself was gone. He had likely stepped into Ted Weiher's leather boots and walked out into the frozen wilderness. He is the only one who has never been found. Gary was different from the others. He was a veteran with a history of schizophrenia. Without his medication, Gary's world didn't just become confusing, it became terrifying. In the heat of the valley, he was a gentle friend. But in the freezing dark of the mountains, without his chemical anchor, what did Gary become? We must consider the group dynamic. The other 4 men looked for a leader. In the absence of their parents and their routine, did they turn to the man who seemed most capable? If Gary suffered a psychotic break, he might have believed they were being hunted. He might have seen the witness, Joseph Shawns, not as a dying man needing help, but as a monster in the dark. Did he command them to stay silent? Did he tell Ted Weiher that the food in those lockers was poisoned? In a group that relies on following the rules, the loudest voice becomes the law, even if that voice is coming from a mind in total collapse. But for all our theories, the human cost remains visceral. Days after the trailer was found, Jack Huett's father joined the search. He was the one who found his son. It wasn't a body. It was a spine and a skull, resting in a thicket of manzanita bushes. Jack, who was so shy he rarely spoke to strangers, died alone in the bush, just hundreds of yards from the trailer. His father identified him by the Levi's he was wearing. It is the ultimate nightmare of every parent to go looking for a son and find only a fragment. We look for logic in the Yuba County Five. We look for a killer, a carjacker, or a freak accident. But the truth is likely far more haunting. They weren't trapped by the snow. The car worked. The trailer was warm. The food was there. They were trapped by a fear we cannot map, a collective psychological paralysis that told them the safest place to be was a freezing bed, and the safest thing to do was nothing. They weren't prisoners of the mountain. They were prisoners of themselves. The snow on the Sierras has melted many times since 1978. The Mercury Montego is long gone. But Gary Mathias is still out there. And the question of what happened in that trailer still hangs in the thin mountain air. If you want to see through the fog of the world's most haunting cases, stay with us. Like, comment with your theory on Gary Mathias, and subscribe. The truth is waiting for those who know where to look. I am the Oracle Investigates, and the next investigation begins soon.